days of old. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Hope that you're all doing well and taking care of yourselves and each other. You may be familiar with a famous narrative from the Talmud about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai was a rabbi who spent years and years in a cave studying Torah. Why did Yochai spend all that time in a cave? Well, it's most likely that he did so because he was hiding from the Romans. And at a certain point in history, the Romans forbade the study of Torah. A line from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai states the following: Esau hates Yaakov, and the descendants of Esau will always hate Yaakov. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saw the Romans as being the descendants of Esau. And so he felt that his people would always be hated by the Romans. In reality, however, there was no connection between the Romans and Esau. But the ability to make the connection worked very well for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But there's a problem with his supposition. For not only wasn't it true, there's no connection between Rome and Esau, but it has been used by Jews and Jewish thinkers throughout generations as if it is ironclad. That is, the descendants of Esau will always hate the Jewish people. And that's problematic because it leads to a sense of victimization that is quite unhealthy for ourselves and for our perception of others. We all know, or we may be, those people who believe the fact that we are universally hated by non-Jews. I don't say that as a denial of anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is and probably will always remain real. But the fact of anti-Semitism does not make every non-Jew an anti-Semite. If the world is only seen as being us against them, then humanity has very little hope. Esau hated Jacob because he took his father's blessing from him. Jacob fled from home and stayed away for many years out of fear of reprisal. But he ultimately returned with his wives and his children. We read about that in this week's Parashat in the beginning. Jacob was afraid that Esau would attack him and that Esau would attack his family. But something really interesting happens in our story. Instead of a hostile reunion between Jacob and Esau, they hug each other. And Esau, in fact, kisses Jacob. So many of the commentators who lived during times of persecution and lived with this notion that the descendants of Esau would always hate the descendants of Jacob, they say that the kiss had to have been insincere. Esau, they said, showed outward signs of love, but in fact, he was hiding deep animosity. We have to understand their comments reflected their perceptions of the realities they lived in, but it's not in the text. In the text, they embrace. In the text, Esau shows love. The reality of Rabbi Shimon's life was that he held deep hostility for Rome. He despised Roman rule over Israel, and he wouldn't accept any of the innovations and the contributions that Rome made to the ancient world and to ancient Israel and the people of Israel. He feared that the people's attraction to their innovations, to their bridge building, to their bathhouses, to their art, would take people away from Torah. His objection may have been about the Romans, but he feared the Jews who were accepting the Roman contributions to the world. So a dialectic is set up whereby it was seen as impossible to find any way to have peace in that relationship. All of us know that today we live in a time of great divisions. You may know that I'm involved in interfaith work, and I want to tell you something about our gatherings, and that is this. Neither the fundamentalists of the Christian community, none of the evangelicals in that community, nor the Orthodox amongst the Jewish community, nor any of the Shiite Muslims join with us. We have Christians, Jews, and Muslims together, but those groups do not join us. For them, the world is simply too black and white, and the other is simply too threatening. Our world suffers terribly from divisions. Jonathan Haidt, a moral psychologist, as well as Yuval Harari, a great philosopher historian, point to the greatest wonder of the world. And what they say was the greatest wonder of the world, in the words of Jonathan Haidt, it's not the Grand Canyon, it's the fact that groups of people were able to form in that canyon to help each other out. They believe that people forming groups is part of the natural desire to survive. Survival of the fittest means that we have to depend on others. But when the group gets too large, then subgroups begin to compete with each other, and the existence of other large groups becomes threatening. And then what happens, and what has happened throughout human history, is that people begin to resent and to hate each other because they are different. There's a well-known expression amongst Bedouin. It goes like this: I hated my brother until I met my cousin. And then my brother and I hated my cousin. We hated my cousin until we met a stranger. And then my brother and I and my cousin, we hated the stranger. Remember the 2,000-year-old man with Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner? Carl Reiner asked the 2,000-year-old man if he remembered what existed before there were countries. And Mel Brooks says, well, we were all different. We all lived in different caves. And Mel Brooks says, each cave had a flag, and every cave had its own anthem. And then Carl Reiner says to the 2,000-year-old man, do you remember your anthem? And then Brooks sings the following: let them all go to hell, except Cave 76. Moral societies are built on the capacity to live with other people and to be able to live with difference. These conflicts are not simply age-old. These conflicts remain real to this very day. And we don't only find them in between different religions or different nations. We're living at a time where we find them within our own society. There are great and deep divides to be found amongst the people that we affiliate with, within Israel and also the United States. And what we find is that people are unable to listen to each other. They're not able to truly see each other. They don't understand that the other can have dignity. They don't see the humanity of the other. And so images are created that fracture our society. Over 70 million people voted for each of the candidates in this last election. Trump seemed to understand the evolutionary concept of groups, that they form in ways that others are to be rejected and made disgusting or dangerous or detestable. And so whether he believed it or not, he created a sense through his strategy that a hostility towards others would make America great again. It may have to do with people of different race, different religions, different ethnicities, people with different abilities or identity. And it was founded on idea that the greatness of our country is due to a core group that defined what it meant to be an American. On the other side, however, we have people who saw all of his followers as not being worth listening to, or that they were misinformed, or that they were deplorable and that they lacked knowledge. This conversation is not about Trump. It's rather for us to look at where we are now based on this evolutionary notion of people and groups, tribes and tribalism. Because in truth, vilification of the political other has been going on as long as people have been, and all of us are part of the problem. So we have to rise up to become part of the solution. How will we be able to see each other, to listen to each other, and work together for the betterment of the entire group, the betterment of the entire nation? Because that's going to be so important as we move forward. I don't know if you saw the op-ed piece in the New York Times last Sunday written by Pope Francis. The Pope spoke about all the great pain in the world. He spoke about the fact that each one of us as individuals can feel so totally overwhelmed by what's happening in the world, whether it be the virus and diseases, whether it be poverty and hunger, or climate challenges. And he spoke about the power of helping one person, the power of feeding one individual in need, the power of a single act that helps in the battle to help repair the environment. As individuals, the challenges of the world can feel so overwhelming, but when we, even as individuals, do something to make a difference, we can begin to feel as if we have power and some sense of fulfillment in a world that's so challenging. It was a beautiful op-ed piece and a magnificent sermon. And I'd recommend that you Google it if you didn't see it. It was from Pope Francis last Sunday morning. I thought of this idea as a step towards not only making us feel a little bit productive in this world, but this is what will help us foster reconciliation. And we need to be reconciled with each other. And every one of us need to be able to buy into this. I've been thinking about the teachers, which I have learned from our Torah and our tradition, and also from Eastern religions and from the social and moral psychologists that I have a great interest in. It's natural for human beings to form groups. Being part of a tribe helps us survive. It's what gives us an identity. Being part of a tribe also gives people a sense of belonging and comfort and purpose. And that's so very important. But we know it can also lead to resentment and hostilities and even war. There has to be a line that we draw between being part of a tribe and becoming tribal. This week I watched this old interview. Sometimes when I just can't find what to watch, I go to YouTube and look for some old stuff. And I saw an interview from the old Dick Cavett show with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And Lennon spoke about his song, Imagine. You remember the song, I know you do. It reflected a time where there was a sense that the world could be at one. Imagine there's no nations. Imagine there's no religion. It was a very simple idealism, which we know cannot be possible in this world, because we also emphasize the importance of difference, the importance of pluralism. And so there's this great tension between particular identities and the need for a universal sense of understanding of all human beings. And that's being able to hold that balance is ultimately what's needed to make the world a little better, for neither extreme works. Part of the challenge can be met when we begin to see people as individuals, and that's what the Pope indicated. When you get to know someone, you don't fear them, even if they're part of an ethnicity or a nationality or a religion that you feel uncomfortable with. And then you no longer think of that someone merely in terms of the group they come from, and you begin to think of the group differently. So one of the challenges moving forward has to do with individuals turning to each other, meeting people from outside of their group, people going back to the family table with the people they disagreed with politically, speaking with neighbors, the organizations of the community, and people looking at each other as individuals. Our tradition, as you know, has this beautiful notion of Tselem Elohim, an image of God. It's really important to be able to see in the other this Tselem Elohim. So there's work to be done. The truth is every society needs to have its conservatives, and every society also needs to have its liberals. We need to have people who are forward-thinking and people with open minds, and we need people also who will connect us to the past and essential values. In this week's reading, in the very beginning, as Jacob was preparing to meet his brother, we learned that he was frightened and he was anxious. That's what the text says. The rabbis asked the question, why the repetition? Wouldn't it have been enough if they just said that Jacob was frightened or that Jacob was anxious? Wouldn't we have gotten the message? But they give a very informative answer. They say the following, that he was frightened because something really bad could happen to him. He was frightened because he feared that Esau might kill him. And so then they ask, well, why was he anxious? And they said because he feared that he would kill Esau, that he would kill Esau. And so what we see is that Jacob had emerged from the wrestling the night before with a sense that the dangers of the world are real, and he was also a part of the danger. He could be killed, but he could also become a killer. So thinking about the way that we're suffering from great divisions in this world, I thought about the fact that part of our problem is me, and part of the problem is you. Because we hold on to our worldviews with such strength and conviction. There are contemporary thinkers that speak about the binary nature of so many values. That is to say, when I look at the world, I think this, and if I'm right, then you have to be wrong. And if you're right, then I have to be wrong. But maybe it's not the way we should be looking at things. Maybe we need to evolve a little bit. Maybe the challenge is for us to say that we can live with difference and that we need to not hold down so tightly to the notion of right and wrong, or this notion that I have to change you, or you thinking you have to change me. People can hold different attitudes, and people can have different approaches. And this is true in every relationship. It's not just true in terms of politics, religions, or the nations of the world. It's also true in our own homes. It's true in our marriages. It's true in our relationships with our children, in our families, in our friends. You know, we all agree we have to be bound by laws that protect basic rights and individual rights, that guide international relations or federal or domestic laws. It's within the framework of law, however, that we need to be able to accept differences. We all need to hold on to an expectation of decency and respect, honesty and trust. And we all need to reject those who want to mythologize the other as being evil. The former ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Powers, once said, you cannot just charge into a situation and say, you're wrong and I'm right and this is going to change. We all may think that, but all of us have to step beyond our own moral righteousness. So Jonathan Haidt says, we need to develop what he calls moral humility, and that will take a passionate commitment to make the world better without assuming that it has to be better in the way you think. I think about the concept of yin and yang in Eastern philosophies. Yin and yang refer to polar opposites, but the beauty of the notion is that they have to exist together. The moral order of an imperfect world may impose itself on us in such a way that we all have to realize that it's in our best interests to figure out how we can accept those with whom we disagree. And perhaps the real challenge is to accept those with whom we disagree the most. The rabbis setting up the paradigm where Esau and Jacob would never be able to get along they, in fact, created a self-fulfilling promise. They've never been able to get along. And it's not just the issue that Esau brings, it's the issue that Jacob has. When Jacob and his descendants believe we can never get along. And what a tragedy. But yet our tradition, you know, is built on another idea. And it is the idea of pluralism. We have a tendency to evoke the most tribal instincts, and we tend to see the world as being us against them. But it doesn't have to be seen that way. It does not have to be seen that way. I have a good friend who laughs about the fact that the two largest categories used in Jewish life are the categories of you're a Jew or you're a non-Jew. But the world is much bigger than that. Jacob and Esau were able to reconcile when they felt comfortable with who they were and that they no longer needed to destroy each other. They both had become successes, as it were, in their own lives. And they both were able to say, I have enough, and you can live there, and I can live here, and we can live next to each other. So it's a wonderful model for us to think about. As Jews, I think we need to be very cognizant of the fact that there's much more to the world than Jews and non-Jews. There's so much more and so many ways of being in this world and looking at this world and understanding and creating meaning. And we're all challenged to find comfort in that. And we do that by finding security and comfort within ourselves, knowing who we are and what we stand for, and knowing that we do have strength. And knowing also there are others who stand for other things, and also they too can have strength. You know, I was thinking about this idea that if it's evolutionary that the individual goes to this place where they know in order to survive they have to form a tribe, but the continuation of this idea leads to a tribalism where people then go to war with each other, resent each other, or hate each other. So what do we do with that inclination? And kind of in a silly way, but I realize that might be the purpose of football. That might be the purpose of sports, where we can put it in a playing field and understand that, you know, we can live with the fans of another team, but we can still give expression to that inclination for those of you who are sports fans. Well, this is the big challenge of our time. One of the great leaders of the world, one of the great religious leaders in this world is the Dalai Lama. His greatness does not come from his strength, and his greatness does not come from his pride in being a Buddhist. The Dalai Lama's greatness comes from his ability to meet every human being where they're at and to show every human being respect. The Dalai Lama's greatness comes from his humility. Each of us has to see what our role will be in creating bonds and bridges that will help heal the world with those whom we disagree. It begins with understanding ourselves, and it begins with understanding and listening and trying to understand the other. It's easy to say, but sometimes it's really difficult to do. In order for us to do it, there are times where we just have to let go of judgment and just be present for others. Just be present for ourselves and for those whom we know. If the human condition, if evolution itself demands that we form groups and become part of tribes for identities, for our own identity, and for our own sense of meaning, and for our own comfort, and if that can lead to the creation of a dangerous tribalism where, if we're great, the other can't be great, and the rejection of others, then smart, moral, and righteous minds will take note of that and take note of the difference that we find amongst human beings in the way they act and the way they think, and will grow to an understanding of all people and acceptance of the other. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We turn to page 155, the Chatzi Kaddish, and it'll be followed by the